Hi, I thought I'd go on a little bit earlier today. Um, there's a show I've been wanting to watch. I watched some of it like a couple years ago, forgot about it, and got reminded of it again. And I found it again, so I want to watch it. It's called the Lizzie Borden Chronicles. It's pretty good. There's only one season out, but I only did watch a couple episodes, so I was gonna watch that after. I'm just dying to, so I was gonna start this early. All right, I'm just gonna start. Sorry, it's early. Hey, Amanda. Yeah, I'm early today. So now we're on chapter 5. And this is September 1888, same year. And this is the Chapman Inquest and Police Inquiry. So we're still on Annie Chapman. As in the case of Nichols, Marianne Nichols, the inquest report on Chapman is not to be found in any of the official files. Weird. And the Home Office files on the murder contain extracts from the Times newspaper relevant to this inquiry. The first extract is from the Times of Tuesday, 11th September, 1888. Hey, Ada, hi, guy. So here's the inquest. It says yesterday morning, Mr. Wynne E. Baxter, the coroner for the Northeastern Division of Middlesex, who was accompanied by Mr. George Collier, the deputy coroner, opened his inquiry in the Alexandra room of the Working Lads Institute, Whitechapel Road, respecting the death of Annie Chapman, who was found murdered in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields, on Saturday morning. Hold on, I gotta tell my kid to shut it. Detective Inspectors Aberline, Scotland Yard, Helson, and Chandler, and Detective Sergeants Thick and Leach watched the case on behalf of the Criminal Investigation Department and Commissioners of Police. The courtroom was crowded, and owing to the number of persons assembled outside the building, the approaches had to be guarded by a number of police constables. The jury, having been impaneled, proceeded to the mortuary to view the body of the deceased, which was lying in the same shell as that occupied a short time since by the remains of the unfortunate Marianne Nichols. This is crazy to me that just anybody can go in and look. Or is it just, wait, sorry, maybe it is just the jury. Yeah, the jury got to see the deceased. That's crazy. Nowadays, you don't see that. John Davis, a carman of 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields, disposed that he occupied the front room, which was shared by his wife and 3 sons. At about 8 o'clock on Friday night, he went to bed, and his sons came in at different times. The last one arrived home about a quarter to 11. Witness was awake from 3 to about 5 o'clock when he fell off to sleep for about half an hour. He got up about a quarter to 6. Lee, can you turn him down? He's got a big mouth. I can hear him like my nephew, like he's sitting right here, but he's not. He's on a phone. That's crazy. So he got up about a quarter to 6. Soon afterwards, he went across the yard. The front portion of the house faced Hanbury Street. On the ground floor was a front door with a passage running through to the backyard. He wasn't certain of the time because he heard the bell of the Spitalfields church strike. The front door and the one leading into the yard were never locked and at times were left open at nights. Well, wouldn't he, if the church bell was going off, wouldn't he know what time it was then? I'm assuming it's the same as it would be today. You just count the number of bells. I don't know. That's just me. Since he had lived in the house, Since he had lived in the house, Witness had never known the doors to be locked, and when the doors were shut, any person could open them and pass into the yard. When he went into the yard on Saturday morning, the back door was shut, but he was unable to say whether it was latched. The front door was wide open, and he was not surprised at finding it so, as it was frequently left open all night. The front door was open all night? That's weird. Between the yard of 29 Hanbury Street and the next house, there was a fence about 5 foot high. When witnesses went down the steps, he saw the deceased woman lying flat on her back. The coroner here observed that in similar inquiries in the country, the police always assisted him by preparing a plan of the locality which happened to be the subject of investigation. He thought the present case was one of sufficient importance for the production of such a plan, and he hoped that in future a plan would be laid before him. Inspector Chandler told the coroner a plan would be prepared. The coroner replied it might be too late to be of any service. Witnesses continuing, so the deceased was lying between the steps and the fence with her head toward the house. He could see that her clothes were disarranged. Witness did not go further into the yard, but at once called two men who worked for Mr. Bailey, a packing case maker of Hanbury Street, whose place was 3 doors off. These men entered the passage and looked at the woman, but did not go into the yard. He was unable to give the names of these two men, but knew them well by sight. Witness had not since seen the men, who went away to fetch the police. Witness also left the house with them. In answer to the coroner, Inspector Chandler said that these men were not known to the police. The coroner remarked that they would have to be found, either by the police or by his own officer. Witness further stated that on leaving the house, he went direct to the Commercial Street Police Station and reported what he had seen. Previous to that, he had not informed anyone living in the house of the discovery. After that, he went back to Hanbury Street, but did not enter his house. He had never previously seen the deceased. In cross-examination, the witness said he was not the first person down that morning, as a man named Thompson, who also lived in the house, was called about 3:30. He had never seen women who did not live in the house in the passage since he had lived there, which was only a fortnight. He did not hear any strange noises before getting up on Saturday morning. He did not return to his house until Saturday afternoon. That's what makes me think that the Ripper used ether, because every single murder that happened, there's no noise, there's no screams, there's nothing. Amelia Farmer stated that she lived at a common lodging house at 30 Dorset Street, Spitalfields, and had lived there for the past 4 years. She had identified the body of the deceased to the mortuary and was sure it was that of Annie Chapman. The deceased formerly lived at Windsor and was the widow of Frederick Chapman. Oh my God, kids. Like big mouth. The deceased formerly lived at Windsor and was the widow of Frederick Chapman, a veterinary surgeon who died about 18 months ago. For 4 years or more, the deceased had lived apart from her husband, and during that period had principally resided in common lodging houses in the neighborhoods of Whitechapel and Spitalfields. About 2 years since the deceased lived at 30 Dorset Street and was then living with a man who made iron sieves. She was then receiving an allowance of 10 cents a week from her husband. Some 18 months since the payment stopped, and it was then that she found her husband was dead. That fact was also ascertained from a relative of the deceased who used to live in Oxford Street, Whitechapel. The deceased went by the name of Seavey, on account of the man with whom she had cohabitated being a sieve maker. This man left her some time ago. During the past week, witnesses had seen the deceased some 2 or 3 times. On Monday, in Dorset Street, she complained of feeling unwell. At that time, she had a bruise on one of her temples. Witness inquiring how she got it, the deceased told her to look at her breast, which was also bruised. The deceased says, "You know the woman," as she mentioned a name which witness did not remember. Both the deceased and the woman referred to were acquainted with a man called Harry the Hawker. In giving an account of the bruises, the deceased told witness that on the first, she went into a public house with a young man named Ted Stanley in Commercial Street. Harry the Hawker and the other woman were also there. The former, who was drunk, put down a florin, which was picked up by the latter, who replaced it with a penny. Some words passed between the deceased and the woman, and in the evening the latter struck her and inflicted the bruises. Hey, Zuna. Hey, Deb. Yeah, I started early because I really want to watch the Lizzie Chronicles, like Lizzie Borden Chronicles. I've been watching a couple of them and I'm just hooked. I want to finish it. Witness again saw the deceased on Tuesday by the side of Spitalfields Church. The deceased again complained of feeling unwell and said she thought she would go into the casual ward for a day or two. She mentioned that she had nothing to eat or drink that day, not even a cup of tea. Witness gave deceased 2 pence, saying, "Here is 2 pence to have a cup of tea, but don't have rum." She knew that the deceased was given to drinking that spirit. The deceased, who frequently got the worse for drink, used at times to earn money by doing crochet work and at others by selling flowers. Witnesses believe that she was not very particular what she did to earn a living and at times used to remain out very late at night. She was in the habit of going to Stratford. Witness did not again see the deceased until Friday afternoon, and about 5 o'clock on that day, she met her in Dorset Street. The deceased, who was sober, in answer to a question from Witness as to whether she was going to Stratford, said she felt too ill to do anything. A few minutes afterwards, Witness again saw the deceased, who had not moved, and she said, "It's no use my giving way. I must pull myself together and go out and get some money, or I shall have no lodgings." That was the last time Witness saw her. She mentioned that she had been an inmate of the casual ward. Deceased was generally an industrial woman, and Witness considered her clever. For the last 5 years, she had been living an irregular life, more especially since her husband died. She had 2 children, and on the death of her husband, they were sent away to school. The deceased had a sister and a mother, but Witness believed they were not on friendly terms. Hey, T King. Hey, Mama 3. This guy named Jack doesn't like ladies of the night. Hey, cool gamer. Yeah, sorry, I started a little bit early. Timothy Donovan stated he was the deputy of a common lodging house at 35 Dorset Street in Spitalfields. He had seen the body in the mortuary and identified it as that of a woman who had lodged at his place. She had been living there for about 4 months, but was not there any day last week until Friday. About 7 o'clock that day, she came to the lodging house and asked him to allow her to go into the kitchen. He asked where she had been all the week, and she replied, "In the infirmary." He then allowed her to go into the kitchen. She remained there until shortly before 2 o'clock the next morning. When she went out, she said, "I have not any money now, but don't let the bed. I will be back soon." At that time, there was a vacant bed, and it was the one she generally occupied. She then left the house, but Witness did not see which way she turned. She had had enough to drink when he last saw her. I don't mean to laugh, but all these women are drunks, and like I just keep picturing them going flip-flopping down the streets. Poor things. Okay, so she had had enough to drink when he last saw her, but she was well able to walk straight. Okay, so she wasn't doing that. The deceased generally got the worst for drink on Saturdays. Oh my God, I'm horrible. It's just the way they talk. It's funny. She has the worst for drink for Saturdays, but not on the other days of the week. He told her that she could find money for drink, but not for her bed, and she replied that she had only been to the top of the street as far as the Ringers public house. He did not see her with anyone that night. On Saturday night, deceased used to stay at the lodging house with a man of military appearance, and Witness had heard he was a pensioner. She had brought other men to the lodging house. On the second, deceased and the pensioner were there together. The deceased paid 8d a night for her bed. The pensioner was about 45 years of age and about 5 foot 8 inches in height. At times, he had the appearance of a dock laborer, sorry, and at others, the appearance of something better. Witness had never had any trouble with the deceased, who was always very friendly with the other lodgers. Yeah, that's a good point. Hey, Kimmy. Yeah, smoke weed and don't drink. Better odds versus serial killers. Smoke weed, I'd laugh at them. I'd get myself killed either way. John Evans, a night watchman at the lodging house, also identified the body of the deceased. He saw her leave the house at about 1:45 on Saturday morning, just before he had asked her whether she had any money for her lodging. She replied that she had not sufficient and then told the last witness she would not be long before she got it. Witness saw her enter a court called Paternoster Row and walked in the direction of Brushfield Street. Witness should say she was the worst for drinks. Everybody's booking her about drinking. Well, I don't know. According to the Times, I don't think there's really much else to do around there. Witness should say she was the worst for drink. She told him she had that night been to see one of her sisters who lived at Vauxhall. Before he spoke to her about her lodging money, she had been out for a pint of beer. He knew that she had been living a rough life, but only knew one man with whom she associated. That man used to come and see her on Saturdays when she was the worst for drink. He called about 2:30 on Saturday afternoon to make inquiries about the deceased. He said he had heard of her death. Witness did not know his name or address. After hearing an account of the death of the deceased, he went out without saying a word. Witness had never heard any person threaten the deceased, and she had never stated she was afraid of anyone. He did not see. I'm just gonna instead of keep saying deceased. Yes, okay, we get it. We know she's deceased. Her name is Annie Chapman. He did not see Annie leave the lodging house with the pensioner on Sunday week. On Thursday, Annie and a woman called Eliza had a fight in the kitchen, during which she got a blow to the chest and a black eye. This girl can. Oh, I don't know why I'm laughing. Horrible. The coroner here intimidated that was as far as he proposed to carry the inquiry at present, and it was adjourned until tomorrow afternoon. The adjourned inquest resumed on the 12th September 1888, and a report of the proceedings appeared in the Times of Thursday, 13th September 1888, on page 5. The adjourned inquest. Yesterday, Mr. Wynne E. Baxter, coroner for the Northeastern Division of Middlesex, resumed his inquiry at the Working Lads Institute, Whitechapel Road, respecting the death of Annie Chapman, who was found murdered in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields, on Saturday last. Detective Inspectors Aberline, Scotland Yard, and Helson, J Division, and Sergeant Thick, H Division, again watched the case on behalf of the Criminal Investigation Department. Fontanius Smith stated he had seen the body in the mortuary and had recognized it as that of Annie Chapman, a widow. Her husband's name was John Chapman, and he had been a coachman at Windsor. A coachman? I thought he was a veterinarian, they said. Pretty sure they said he was a veterinarian. So it'll take me forever to get back to that. The deceased had been separated from him. Sorry, not that I'm sorry. I don't want to say the deceased. Annie had been separated from him 3 or 4 years before his death. She was 47 years of age. Some time ago, he met Annie, who first recognized him. She did not know, or she did not say where she was living or what she was doing. The witness knew nothing about her associates. James Kent stated he lived at 20 B Block, King David Lane, Shadwell, and was a packing case maker in the employ of Mr. Bailey, 23A Hanbury Street, Spitalfields. He went to his work at 6 o'clock in the morning. He got to work between 10 minutes and 6:15 on Saturday morning. His employer's gate was open, and he waited for more of the hands to come up. While he was waiting, there was an elderly man named Davis who lived 2 or 3 doors off, came out of his house and said, "Men, come here." Davis had his belt in his hand. Witness and James Green, who was with Witness at the time, went to 29 Hanbury Street, the house where the man came out. They went through the passage, and Witness stood at the steps at the back door. He saw a woman lying in the yard by the side of the steps, between them and the partition. Her head was against the house, and the whole of her body was on the ground. At this stage, an officer of police produced a plan of the building and the yard. Witness, continuing, so the face of the deceased was visible, her clothes were disarranged, and the apron she was wearing appeared to have been thrown over the clothes. Witness did not go down the steps and believed no other person entered the yard until the inspector, Chandler, came. He could see that the deceased was dead. She had a handkerchief of some kind round her throat. He could not see any blood, but she was besmeared with blood over the face and the hands as though she had been struggling. He did not notice any other injuries. Her hands were raised and bent, and the palms towards the upper portion of her body, as though she had fought for her throat. There were marks of blood about her legs, but he did not notice any about her clothes. He did not look very particularly about her things, as felt too much frightened. Witness then went to the front of the house to see whether a constable was coming. He then had some brandy and afterwards went to the shop and got a piece of canvas to throw over the body. When he returned to the house, a mob had assembled. The inspector had arrived and was in possession of the yard. Witness could not say whether anyone went to the body before the inspector came, but he did not think so, as everyone appeared too much frightened to go near it. The foreman over witness arrived at the workshop about 10 minutes to 6. Hey, Teresa. Don't worry, you're not late. I'm early. He could see the deceased was dead. She had a handkerchief of some. Did I not just. Wow, sorry. James Green, 36, Action Street, Burdett Road, disposed that he was a packing case maker in the employ of Mr. Bailey. He got to the workshop about 10 minutes past 6 on Saturday morning and accompanied Kent to the back of 29 Hanbury Street. He looked at the body and then left the premises with Kent. He did not see anyone touch the body and thought no one went near it. He saw Inspector Chandler arrive and at the time was on the steps of the landing of his workshop. No one was in the yard when the inspector arrived, but the mob stood at the front door. At that time, the body was in the same state as when the witness first saw it. Amelia Richardson, 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields, said she was a widow. She rented half of the house, the ground floor portion, and the workshop and the yard. Witness occupied the workshop and carried on business there. She employed her son and a man. They were supposed to begin work at 6 o'clock, but did not do so on Saturday morning. The man did not come until 8 o'clock. He was frequently late. Her son lived in John Street, Spitalfields, about 6 o'clock on Saturday morning. Her grandson, Thomas Richardson, which was 14 years of age, who lived with her, went downstairs. They heard someone in the passage and thought the place was on fire. He returned directly afterwards saying, "Oh, grandmother, there is a woman murdered." Witness went down immediately and saw the body of Annie lying in the yard. The police and several others were in the passage, but there was no one in the yard at the time. She was not properly attired. She went back to her room and dressed herself. The police then took possession of the place. By the coroner. She occupied the first floor front room, and her grandson also slept in the same room. They went to bed about 9:30. She did not sleep through the night, and should say she was awake half the time. She woke at 3 o'clock and only dozed afterwards. She did not hear any noise during the night. Mr. Walker occupied the first floor back room. He was an old man and slept there with his son, who was weak minded. The lad was very inoffensive. There were 2 rooms on the ground floor, and they were occupied by Mrs. Hardyman, who had one son, 16 years of age. He also slept there. Miss Hardyman got her living by selling what? Miss Hardyman got her living by selling cat's meat and also used the room for a cat's meat shop. Ew, they did that? Oh my god, those poor kitties. I didn't wanna know that. And her son went out selling the meat. He was 16. Witness occupied the back room for cooking. When Witness went to bed at 9:30, she locked up that room and took the key with her. It was still locked when she came down in the morning. Mr. John Davis and his wife occupied the third floor front room, together with their 3 sons. An old woman named Sarah Cox occupied the back room on that floor. So I take it all their kitty top. Oh, yuck. So I take it the way they lived back then is they would basically there'd be the one house and the living room be occupied as a bedroom for someone, and then like back bedroom for this person, so they'd all live together in this one house. I don't know, I could never do that. But I guess you gotta do what you gotta do. Witness kept her out of charity. Okay, Mr. Thompson, a Carmen, his wife, and an adopted little girl occupied the second floor front room. A few minutes to 4 on Saturday morning, Witness called Thompson. She heard him leave the house, and before doing so, he did not go into the backyard. When he went out, she called out, "Good morning" to him. Mr. and Mrs. Copsey lived in the second floor back and were cigar makers. So you got a cat used to have outside toilets too? Oh, yeah, you would know about all this stuff too. So you have a a cat killer in the front, and in the back, there's a cigar maker. It's just so odd. Well, I'm not used to it. I've never heard of it, ever. The witness was not the owner of the house. The front and the back doors were always left open, as the case with all the houses about there, for they were all let out into rooms. I can just imagine what they'd look like. In each room, was it like a bedroom? Because the toilets would be outside, so would each room be their living quarters, and then they, like, all share the kitchen, or do they have a kitchen in this room? Like, so it's like little bachelors without toilets? I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea, I just wanna know. The jury by the jury. She had property in the place, but was not afraid of the doors being left open. She had never heard of any robberies. About a month ago, at 3 o'clock in the morning, she heard a man on the stairs. She could not hear anyone going through the passage, but did not hear anyone on Saturday morning. On market mornings, there was a great bustle and noise. On that morning, she did not hear any cries. If a person had gone through about 3:30, it might not have attracted her attention, although she would have heard them. People frequently went through the backyard, and perhaps some who had no business there. She was confident that no one made a noise in going through the on Saturday morning, and those who went through must have kept purposely quiet. If she knew it, she would not allow any stranger to go through. Then why leave everything open? They just trust people, not scared of being robbed. Annie Hardyman, 29 Hanbury Street, said she occupied the ground floor front room. On Friday night, she went to bed about 10:30. Her son slept in the same room. She was not awakened during the night and did not wake until 6 o'clock when she heard footsteps in the passage. She woke up her son and told him to go see what was the matter. He came back and said a woman had been killed in the yard. Witness did not go out. She did not hear anything during the night, but had often heard people going through the passage into the yard. She had not gone to see who they were. She did not know the deceased, and to her knowledge, had never seen her. John Richardson of 2 John Street stated that he acted as a porter in Spitalfields Market and also assisted his mother in the business of packing case making. Between a quarter and 20 minutes to 5, he went to 29 Hanbury Street. He went there to see whether the place was properly secured, as some months ago it was broken into. He only went there at that time on market mornings and had done so for a long time in the past. When he got to the house, he found the front door closed. He lifted the latch and went through the passage to the yard door. They did not go into the yard, but went and stood on the steps. The back door was closed when he got to it. He stood on the steps and cut a piece of leather from off one of his boots. He cut with a table knife about 5 inches long. It was now at his house in John Street. It being market morning, he put the knife into his pocket. He could not say why he put the knife into his pocket, and suppose he did so by mistake. After cutting the piece of leather off his boot, he tied up the boot and went out of the house. He did not close the back door as it closed itself. He was sure he closed the front door. He was not more than 3 minutes in the house. It was not light, but was getting so, and was sufficient for him to see all over the place. He could not have failed to notice a deceased had she been lying there then. He saw the body 2 or 3 minutes before the doctor came and saw it from the adjoining yard. He went there in the consequence of a man named Perman in the market telling him there was a murder in Hanbury Street by the corner. He cut piece of leather off his boot because it hurt him. There, now I finally know why he cut this leather because it always bugged me. Why are you sitting on the front step cutting leather off your boot? What is the point? What is the purpose? Is this something that they do? Nope, apparently they don't. It's because it hurt him. Now I know the answer. He took a piece out the previous day, but that was not sufficient. As a matter of fact, that was the only thing that he did at Hanbury Street. He didn't go into the yard at all. His object, principally in going to the house, was to see that the cellar was all right, and he looked and found that it was so. The coroner, you do not seem to have taken much trouble to see that it was all right. Witness, continuing, said he could see the padlock was on the door. He did not sit upon the top step, but rested his feet on the flags of the yard. That would be quite close to the spot where the woman was found. He had been to the house, and in the passage of at all hours of the night and had seen lots of strangers there. These he had seen at all hours. He had seen both men and women there and had turned them out. The witness was here sent to fetch the knife he had spoken about. Amelia Richardson recalled she said she had never lost anything and was so confident of her neighbors that she left her door open. A long while ago, she missed a saw and a hammer from the cellar. The cellar door was fastened with a padlock, and after the robbery was committed, the door was put to. The robbery was committed in the early morning. She was aware that her son was in the habit of coming to the house to see whether the place was all right. She never had any suspicion that her yard was used for immoral purposes. Her son wore a leather apron while at work in the cellar, and on Thursdays she washed it. On Saturday morning, the apron was against the fence and the police took possession of it. At that time, it was in the yard under the tap. The police found it in the same position in which it was put. The tap supplied the house with water, and the apron was left lying on the stones from the Thursday until Saturday. The police also took away a nail box, but there were no nails in it. On Friday night, there was a pan full of water by the tap, and it was in the same position on Saturday morning. Witness had never known that woman had been found on the first floor landing, and her son had never spoken to her about it. By the jury, the pan of water was just under the tap, and the apron was not quite under it. John Pizer, 22 of Mulberry Street, Commercial Road, stated he was a bootmaker. He had been known by the nickname of Leather Apron. He went home on Thursday night from the west end of the town. He reached Mulberry Street about a quarter to 11 o'clock. His brother and stepmother also lived there. He remained indoors until he was arrested by Sergeant Thick on Monday morning. Up to that time, he had not left the house. His brother advised him to remain indoors as he was the object of a false suspicion. This is what is perceived to be Jack the Ripper I'm talking about right now. He did so in consequence of that. He was not now in custody and had cleared his character. Coroner says, I called you to give you an opportunity of doing so. Witness, in answer to the coroner, said he was in the Holloway Road on Thursday week. The coroner, it is important you should say where you were and give an account of your time. Witness said he stayed at Crossman's Common Lodging House in the Holloway Road. It was called the Roundhouse. He slept the night there. It was the night of the London dock fire. He went into the lodging house about 2:15 on Friday morning. Hey, Jesse. Oh, did you try it and it worked? Okay, good. It's funny you mentioned that. My sister messaged me the other day and said her stomach wasn't feeling good. So I told her to get some chamomile tea and a little, like a slivered piece of ginger, and she tried and she said it worked too. Yeah. She's like, "How did you even know?" I was like, "I don't know. It's like an old school remedy. I think I learned it from my grandmother." He then saw on the place cards the report of another horrible murder. At 11 o'clock the previous night, he had a supper at the lodging house. He then went out and went as far as the Seven Sisters Road. Then he turned and went down the Holloway Road. He then saw the reflections of a fire. He went as far as the church in the Holloway Road and saw the lodging house keeper of the Roundhouse and one or two constables talking together. He asked a constable where the fire was. He replied it was a long way off. Witness then asked him where he thought it was. The officer replied, down by the Albert docks. It was then about 1:30, as near as he could recollect. He then went as far as the highway railway station, then turned back and went into the lodging house. The night watchman did not complain of his being late, but as it were after 11 o'clock, the time when all unoccupied beds would be relet, Witness paid him 4D for another bed. Witness then sat on a form in the kitchen for a time, smoking a clay pipe. He then went to bed. He got up at 11 o'clock when the day attendant told him he must get up and he wanted to make the bed. He dressed and went down into the kitchen. That was all he had to say. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, just I would have one every day. By the jury. When he spoke at the west end of the town, he came from a lodging house in Peter Street, Westminster. Coroner says, I think it only fair to say that the statement can be corroborated. Detective Sergeant William Thick, H Division, said that a man named Leather Apron, having been suspected of the murder on Monday morning, he arrested Pizer at 22 Mulberry Street. He had known Jack Pizer for many years, and when people in the neighborhood spoke of Leather Apron, they meant Jack Pizer. He was released from custody on Tuesday night at 9:30. John Richardson recalled, produced the knife with which he cut the piece of leather from his boot. He found the knife on his table by the jury. His mother had heard him speak of finding people acting immorally in the passage. The coroner said he thought the police should have the knife and handed it to them. Henry John Holland, 4 Aidan Yard, Mile End Road, stated that on Saturday morning he was passing along Hanbury Street on his way back to work in his Chiswell Street. Sorry, his way to his work in Chiswell Street. It's about 8 minutes past 6 when he passed, number 29. He saw an elderly man come out of the house and said, "Come and look in the backyard." Witness went through the passage and saw Annie Chapman lying in the yard just by the back door. Witness went into the yard and looked at Annie, but did not touch her or her clothes. He did not see anyone touch her. He then went for a policeman. The first one he saw was in Spitalfields Market. He said he could not come, and witness must get one from outside. He was unable to see another constable by the jury. He told the policeman that it was a murder and a similar case to which had happened in Bucks Row. The policeman was standing by himself and was not doing anything. The same afternoon, witness went to the Commercial Street Police Station and reported the conduct of the constable. The foreman says, "I think the constable ought to have gone." An inspector stated that there were certain spots which the constables were not allowed to leave under any circumstances, but they were supposed to send someone else. The inquiry was then adjourned until today. The press interest in Jack Pizer was not restricted to his appearance in the inquest reports. The Times of Wednesday, 12 September 1888 carried the following report. The Whitechapel murder. The latest reports as to the search for the murderer are not of a hopeful character. On Monday evening, it was stated that Jack Pizer, the man who was detained on suspicion of being concerned in causing the death of the woman Annie Chapman, was still in custody at the Leman Street Police Station. Last night, it was decided to release him. Many reports of a startling character have been circulated respecting the acts of violence committed by a man wearing a leather apron. No doubt many of the accounts of assaults committed on women in this district have been greatly exaggerated, yet so many versions have been related that the police give credit to at least a portion of them. They have therefore been keeping a sharp lookout for Leather Apron, but nothing has been heard of his whereabouts. The friends of Pizer stoutly deny that he was known by that name, but on the other hand, Sergeant Thick, who has an intimate knowledge of the neighborhood in which the murder was committed, affirms that he knew Jack Pizer well by sight and always knew him by the nickname spoken of. Sergeant Thick also knew that he was in the habit of wearing a leather apron after the news of the murder was circulated. A half Spaniard and half Bulgarian, who gave the name of Emmanuel Dalbast Violina, waited on the police with respect to his inquiry. He stated that he, his wife, and 2 children tramped from Manchester to London with the view of being able to immigrate to Australia and looked up their abode in one of the lodging houses in Hanbury Street. Early last Saturday morning, walking along Hanbury Street, he noticed a man and a woman quarreling in a very excited manner. Violina distinctly heard the man threaten to kill the woman by sticking a knife into her. They passed on, and Violina went to his lodging. After the murder, he communicated what he had seen to the police. At 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon, Sergeant Thick assisted the Inspector Cansby, placed about a dozen men, the greater portion of whom were Jews, in the yard of the Leman Street Police Station. Jack Pizer was then brought out and allowed to place himself where he thought proper among the assembled men. He is a man of short stature with black whiskers and a shaven chin. Violina, who had been accommodated in one of the lower rooms of the station house, was then brought up into the yard. Having keenly scrutinized all the faces before him, he at once, without any hesitation or doubt whatsoever, went up to Jack Pizer and identified him as the man whom he heard threaten a woman on the night of the murder. Jack Pizer, who has not been allowed to have communication with any of his friends, was then taken back to the station house. It was then decided, with the approval of Detective Inspector Aberline, that Violina should be taken to the Whitechapel mortuary to see whether he could identify the deceased woman as the one he had seen in Jack Pizer's company early on Saturday morning. The result is not announced, but it is believed that he was unable to identify her. Subsequently, cross-examination so discredited Violina's evidence that it was wholly distrusted by the police, and Jack Pizer was set at liberty. And this is the one that they were saying is Jack the Ripper. Oh, no worries, Dragon. I kind of went a bit early. Last evening, Timothy Donovan, the deputy of the lodging house in Dorset Street, at which the woman, Annie Chapman, formerly lived, made a statement to a representative of a news agency. He says he knows Leather Apron very well. Some months ago, he ejected him from the lodging house, and that was for offering violence to a woman who was staying there. Donovan is surprised that the police have not called on him to go to Lehman Street Police Station, as he would have no difficulty in deciding whether the prisoner there is Leather Apron, Jack the Ripper. Yesterday morning, two police constables visited Donovan and showed him two rings. One, a half worn out engaged ring, the other appearing to be a wedding ring, which they stated had been discovered at a pawnbroker's. Donovan did not think they were the rings he had seen Miss Chapman wearing. The police then left, and Donovan heard no more of the incident. Both Donovan and a former watcher at the lodging house named West say that when they last saw Leather Apron, he was wearing a kind of deerstalker hat, double peaked, which describes him as a man not more than 5 foot 4 inches in height. Miss Fittyman, the landlady of the house, into which it was stated a blood-stained and wild-looking man entered shortly after the hour at which the murder was probably committed on Saturday morning, has been taken to Lehman Street Station, and on seeing Jack Pizer, she expressed herself as quite certain that he was not the man who came into her house on the occasion spoken of. Piggott, the other man arrested, whose father was well known in Gravesend for many years as an insurance agent, was first seen in Gravesend on Sunday afternoon about 4 o'clock. He then asked four young men who were standing at the London Road near Princess Street where he could get a glass of beer, he having walked from Whitechapel. The young men told him. Following their directions, he jumped into a tram car going towards Northfleet. The young men noticed that he had a bad hand and that he carried a black bag. He was without his bag when subsequently seen. He left a paper parcel at a fish shop kept by Mrs. Bitchteller. I'm sure that's not her last name, but that's what it says. Stating he was going across the water to Tilbury. Instead of doing so, he went to Pope's Head public house, where his conversation about the hatred of women aroused suspicion and led to being detained by the police authorities. Superintendent Barry, who was making most active and exhaustive inquiries, found the paper parcel at the fish stop to contain two shirts and a pair of stockings. One of the shirts, a blue striped one, being torn about the breast and having marks of blood on it. At the police station, Piggott first said he knocked down the woman who had bitten his hand in a yard at the back of a lodging house in Whitechapel, but he subsequently said the occurrence took place in Brick Lane. What has become of the black bag which Piggott was seen to have in Gravesend on Sunday afternoon is not known. It appears that Piggott of late years has followed his business off a publican, and that 7 or 8 years ago he was in good position, giving 8,000 to go into a house at Hoxton. Some question having arisen as to Piggott's mental condition, it may be added that he appeared perfectly rational during his detention at Gravesend. The next report of this inquest appeared in the Times of Friday, 14 September 1888, page 4. This one's titled The Whitechapel Murder. Yesterday, Mr. Wayne E. Baxter, coroner of the Southeastern Division of Middlesex, resumed his inquiry at the Working Lads Institute, Whitechapel Road, respecting the death of Annie Chapman, who was found murdered in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields, last Saturday morning. Detective Inspectors Aberline, Scotland Yard, Helson, Chandler, Beck, and Detective Sergeant W. Thick, H Division, again represented the Criminal Investigation Department. Inspector Joseph Chandler from H Division said that about 2 minutes past 6 on Saturday morning, he was on duty in Commercial Street. He saw several men running up Hanbury Street, and he beckoned to them. One of them said, "Another woman has been murdered." Witness at once went with him to 29 Hanbury Street and passed through the passage into the yard. There were several people in the passage, but no one was in the yard. He saw the body of the deceased lying on the ground on her back. Her head was towards the back of the wall of the house, but it was some 2 feet from the wall. and the body was not more than 6 inches or 9 inches from the steps. The face was turned on the right side, and the left hand rested on the left breast. The right hand was lying down by the left side, and the legs were drawn up. The body was lying parallel with the fencing and was about 2 yards distant. Witnesses remaining there sent for Divisional Surgeon Dr. Phillips and also the station for the ambulance and further assistance. When the constables arrived, he removed all persons from the passage and saw that no one touched the body till the doctor arrived. He obtained some sacking from one of the neighbors to cover the body pending the arrival of Dr. Phillips, of the doctor. Dr. Phillips arrived about past 6 and examined the body. He then directed the body to be removed to the mortuary and was done on the police ambulance. After the body had been removed, a piece of coarse muslin and a small pocket hair comb case was found. A portion of an envelope was found lying near where her head had been, and a piece of paper containing 2 pills. He had not the pills there. He had not the pills there, as inquiries were being made about them. On the back of the envelope was the seal of the Sussex Regiment. The other portion of the writing was torn away. On the other side of the envelope was the letter M in a man's handwriting. There was also a post office stamp, London, 28 August 1888, with a stamp that was indistinct. There was no postage stamp on that portion. On the front side of the envelope were the letters SP in writing. He also found a leather apron lying in the yard, saturated with wet, and it was about 2 feet from the water tap. A box, commonly used by packing case makers, a piece of flat steel that had since been identified by Mrs. Richardson, and also a spring were found lying close to where the body was found. By the corner. So they say some portions of the yard were composed of earth, others of stones that had not been properly paved. Some of the stones were flat while the others were round. He could not detect any appearance of a struggle having taken place. The palings were only temporarily erected, although they might have supported the weight of a man while he was getting over them. There was no evidence of anyone recently got over them, and there was no breakage. Witness examined the adjoining yard. None of the palings had been broken, although they had since been broken. The palings near the body were stained with blood. In the wall of number 27, marks were discovered on Tuesday last, and they had been seen by Dr. Phillips. There was no drops of blood in the passage or outside, and the blood stains were only found in the immediate neighborhood of the body. There were also a few spots of blood on the back wall at the head of the body and some 2 feet or 3 feet from the ground. The largest spot was about the size of a sixpenny piece. They were all within a small compass. Witness assisted in drawing out a plan of the place, and the plan produced was a correct one. Witness searched the clothing of Annie Chapman after the body was removed to the mortuary. The outside jacket, which was a long black one and reached to the knees, had bloodstains round the neck, both on the inside and out, and 2 or 3 spots on the left arm. The jacket was hooked at the top and buttoned down. There did not appear to have been any struggle with the jacket. The pocket produced was found worn under the skirt. It was torn down the front and also at the side, and did not contain anything. The deceased had on a black skirt, on which was a little blood at the back. There was no damage to the lower portion of the clothing. The boots were on feet, while the stockings were bloodstained. None of the clothing was torn. Witness saw young John Richardson a little before 7 o'clock in the passage of the house. He told witness he had been to the house about 4:45 that morning, and he went to the back door and looked down at the cellar to see that all was right. He then went away to his work in the market. He did not say anything to witness about cutting his boot, but said he was sure the woman was not there at the time. By the foreman, he says, the back door opened outwards onto the yard on the left-hand side. There was the side on which the body was lying. Richardson might have seen the body if he did not go into the yard. If he went down the steps and the body was there at the time, he was bound to see it. Richardson told witness he did not go down the steps and did not mention the fact that he sat down on the steps and cut his boots. Foreman says, are you going to produce the pensioner we have heard so much about? Witness says, we have not been able to find him. No one can give us the least idea who he is. We have instructed the deputy of the lodging house to let us know at once if he again goes there. The coroner says, I should think that if the pensioner knows his own business, he would come forward himself. And the foreman says, it is important he should be here, as he was in the habit of spending Saturday nights with Annie Chapman, the deceased. Sergeant Edmund Barry, 31H, stated that on Saturday last, he conveyed the body of the deceased from 29 Hanbury Street to the Whitechapel mortuary on the police ambulance. Detective Sergeant Thick examined the body and gave a description of it to witness. In doing this, the sergeant moved the clothing about. Two females from 35 Dorset Street were also present and described the clothing to the witness. They did not touch the clothing or the body. Inspector Chandler then came. Inspector Chandler recalled that he reached the mortuary a few minutes after 7 o'clock, and the body, which was lying on the ambulance, did not appear to have been disturbed. He did not remain until the doctor arrived, but left a constable in charge. It was Constable Barnes, 376H. Robert Mann, an inmate of the Whitechapel Union, stated that he had a charge at the mortuary. At 7 o'clock on Saturday morning, he received the body of the deceased and remained with it until the doctor arrived at 2 o'clock. Two nurses from the infirmary came in and dressed the body. He was not in the shed when that was done. Coroner says this is not a mortuary, but simply a shed. Bodies ought not to be taken there. In the East End, where mortuaries are required more than anywhere else, there are no mortuaries. When bodies were thrown up from the river off Wapping, they have to be put in boxes, and there's no mortuary. Tresemme, you like that? Pet me and you bird. Oh my god, you're funny. The foreman agreed that that one was necessary. He added that a reward should be offered in the case by the government. Some gentlemen were forming a fund to offer reward, and Mr. Montague, MP, had offered 100. The witness in the further examination said he was present when Dr. Phillips made his postmortem examination. While he was doing so, witness picked up the handkerchief produced from off the clothing, which was lying in a corner of the room. He gave the handkerchief to Dr. Phillips, who told him to put it in some water. Witness did not see the handkerchief across the throat of the deceased. It had blood on it, as though it had been across her throat. Timothy Donovan, 35 Dorset Street, recalled identified the handkerchief produced, which deceased generally wore around her throat. She bought it off another lodger at the lodging house a week or a fortnight before she met with her death. She was wearing it when she left the lodging house on Saturday morning and had under it a piece of black woolen scarf. It was tied in the front in one knot by the foreman. He would recognize the pensioner if he saw him again, and he knew Harry the Hawker. He had not seen the pensioner since Saturday. On that day, when he came by to the lodging house, witnesses sent for the police, but before they came, he went away. He was a man of solidarity appearance, and at times used to come up differently attired. Mr. George Bagster Phillips, 2 Spital Square, stated he was a divisional surgeon of police and had been for 23 years. At 6:20 Saturday morning, he was called by the police to 29 Hanbury Street, and he arrived there at 6:30. He found the dead body of a female in the possession of the police, lying in the backyard, on her back, and on the left hand of the steps. The head was about 6 inches in front of the level of the bottom step, and her feet were towards a shed, which proved to contain wood at the bottom of the yard. The left arm was placed across the left breast, the legs were drawn up and feet resting on the ground, and the knees turned outwards. The face was swollen and turned on the right side. The tongue protruded between the front teeth, but not beyond the lips. The tongue was evidently much swollen. The front teeth were perfect, so far as the first molar, top and bottom, and very fine teeth they were. The body was terribly mutilated. He searched the yard, and in doing so, he found a small piece of coarse muslin with a pocket comb and paper case lying at the feet of the woman near the paling, and they apparently had been placed there in order or arranged there. They also found and delivered the police other articles, including the leather apron. The stiffness of the limbs was not marked, but was evidently commencing. He noticed that the throat was dissevered deeply, that the incisions through the skin were jagged and reached right around the neck. On the back wall of the house, between the steps and the paling, which bound the yard on the left side, about 18 inches from the ground, were about 6 patches of blood, varying in size from a sixpenny piece to a small point. On the wooden paling between the 2 yards in question and the next, smears of blood corresponding to where he heard of the deceased lay were to be seen. They were about 14 inches from the ground and immediately above the part where the blood that had flowed from the neck. Soon after 2 o'clock on the Saturday, he went to the labor yard of the Whitechapel Union for the purpose of further examination of the body. He was surprised to find that the body had been stripped and was lying ready on the table for examination. It was under great difficulty he could make his examination, and, as on many occasions, he had not met with similar difficulties. He now raised his protest, as he had previously done, that members in his profession should be called upon to perform their duties in these inadequate circumstances. There were no adequate conveniences for a post mortem examination, and at a particular season of the year, it was dangerous to the operator. Did they find out who the Ripper was? It sounds to me like it's the guy they're calling Leather Apron, Jack Pizer. Mm. Their coroner says, as a matter of fact, there is no public mortuary in the city of London to Bow. Witness continuing said the body had evidently been attended to since her removal to the mortuary, probably to be washed. He noticed the same protrusion of his tongue. There was a bruise over the right temple. On the upper eyelid, there was a bruise, and there was two distinct bruises, each of the size of a top of a man's thumb, on the fore part of the top of the chest. The stiffness of the limbs were now well marked. There was a bruise over the middle part of the bone of the right hand. There was an old scar on the left side of the frontal bone. The stiffness was more noticeable on the left side, especially in the fingers, which were partly closed. There was an abrasion over the ring finger with distinct markings of ring or rings. The throat had been severed as before described. The incisions into the skin indicated that they had been made from the left side of the cheek. There were two distinct clean cuts on the left side of the spine. They were parallel from each other and separated by about half an inch. The muscular structures appeared as though an attempt had been made to separate the bones of the neck. There were various other mutilations of the body, but he was of opinion that they occurred subsequent to the death of this woman and to the large escape of blood from the division of the neck. At this point, Dr. Phillips said that, as from these injuries, he was satisfied as to the cause of death. He thought that he had better not go into further details of the mutilations, which could only be painful to the feelings of the jury and the public. The coroner decided to allow the course to be adopted. Witness continuing said, the cause of death was visible from the injuries he had described. From the appearance, he was of opinion that the breathing was inferred with previous to death, and that death arose from syncope of failure of the heart's action in consequence of loss of blood caused by severance of the throat. Severance of the throat. The coroner says he should say that the instrument used at the throat and the abdomen was the same. It must have been a very sharp knife with a thin, narrow blade. It must have been at least 6 inches to 8 inches in length, probably longer. He should say that the injuries could not have been inflicted by a bayonet or a sword bayonet. They could have been done by such instrument as a medical man used for post-mortem purposes, but the ordinary surgical cases might not contain such an instrument. Those used by slaughtermen, well ground down, might have caused them. He thought the knives used by those in the leather trade would not be long enough in the blade. There was indications of knowledge, which were only less indicated in consequence of haste. The whole of the body was not present, and absent portions being from the abdomen. The mode in which these portions were extracted showed some anatomy knowledge. He did not think these portions were lost in the transit of the body. He should say that the deceased had been dead for at least 2 hours and probably more when he first saw her, but it was right to mention that it was a fairly cool morning and that the body would be more apt to cool rapidly from its having lost a great quantity of blood. There was no evidence about the body of the woman of a struggle having taken place. He was positive that the deceased entered the yard alive. He made a practical search of the passage and approached the house, and he saw no trace of blood. There was no blood on the apron, which had the appearance of not having been recently unfolded. He was shown some staining on the wall of number 25. To the eye of the novice, it looked like blood, but it was not so. The deceased was far advanced in disease of the lungs and membranes of the brain, but it had nothing to do with the cause of death. The stomach contained little food, but there was not any sign of fluid. There was no appearance of the deceased having taken alcohol, but there were signs of great deprivation, and he should say that she had been badly fed. He was convinced she had not taken any strong alcohol for some hours before her death. The injuries were certainly not self-inflicted. The bruises on the face were evidently recent, especially about the chin and the sides of the jaw, but the bruises in front of the chest and temple were of longer standing, probably of days. He was of opinion that the person who cut the deceased's throat took hold of her by the chin and then commenced the incision from left to right. He thought it was highly probable that a person could call out, but with regard to an idea that she might have been gagged, he could only point the swollen face and protruding tongue, both of which were signs of suffocation. The handkerchief produced, together with the pocket, he separated from the rest of some articles said to be taken from the body of deceased at the Whitechapel mortuary, and not then in the custody of the mortuary keeper. A handkerchief was round in the throat of Annie Chapman when he saw her early in the morning. He should say it was not tied on after the throat was cut. Mary Elizabeth Simons, nurse at the Whitechapel Infirmary, said on Saturday morning she and a nurse named Frances Wright were instructed to go to the mortuary. The body was lying on the ambulance. They were directed by Inspector Chandler to undress the deceased. The witness took the clothes off and placed them in a corner of the shed. They left the handkerchief round the neck of the deceased. They washed the blood off the body. There was blood on the chest and it had run down from the throat. She found the pocket, the strings of which were not broken. Inspector Chandler stated he did not instruct the nurses to undress and wash the body. What? The coroner's officer said it was done by order of the clerk to the guardians. At this point, the inquiry was adjourned until Wednesday next. Holy cow. We're still on the Annie Chapman murder. Oh my god, this goes on and on and on and on and on. So we'll still be talking about this on Thursday. I just wanted to see something here. Okay. We should watch this. Okay. So this is called A Visit to Hanbury Street on the weekend of Annie Chapman's murder. What page? I am 99. But I'm gonna pause there until Thursday because my throat's getting sore. I've been reading for an hour. So I'm gonna play this little video. I thought this would be cool. Um, yeah, this one's called A Visit to Hanbury Street on the weekend of Annie Chapman's murder. That'd be cool. So this one's only 12 minutes and 23 seconds. I'm just gonna speed it up so I don't get any copyrights or anything. Oh, it already is. Okay.
Annie Chapman was found in the backyard of number 29 Hanbury Street at 6 a.m. on September the 8th, 1888, by John Davis, an elderly resident of the building. Throughout that weekend, the police presence in the area was increased, and journalists headed for Hanbury Street to see what information they could find.
A lot of these drawings I have, but not a lot of these. Like some stuff I have, some stuff I don't in this book. I'm just trying to see something here. Yeah, I got that one. I don't think I have that one. Oh, I do.
About the crime and its perpetrator. The Dundee Courier, on Monday the 10th of September, provided its readers with a glimpse of what was happening in Hanbury Street over the course of that weekend. As news began to spread of another gruesome murder, and excited and agitated crowds began arriving in the vicinity. The article also gave an insight into the measures being adopted by the police to try and bring the murderer to justice. The article read, All London was awakened on Saturday to the painful and awful fact that another murder, far more diabolical and fiendish, had been perpetrated on another woman of the same class as the poor wretch found in Bucks Row on Friday last. The victim in this case was discovered on Saturday morning, lying in a backyard at the foot of a passage leading into the lodging house, 29 Hanbury Street, formerly Old Browns Lane, Spitalfields. The house is occupied by Mrs. Amelia Richardson, who lets it out to various lodgers, and it seems that the door which admits to the passage, at the foot of which lies the yard where the body was found, is always open for the convenience of the lodgers. Davis,
Oh,
the
so
lodger
that's
who
why
found
it's
the
open.
body, immediately communicated with the police at Commercial Street Police Station, and Inspector Chandler and several constables arrived on the scene in a short time, where they
That's actually really neat that the building's still there.
found the woman. Even at this early hour, the news spread quickly, and great excitement prevailed among the
Hey,
occupants of the
Heavenly
adjoining
Cow.
houses, and an excited crowd gathered in front of Mrs. Richardson's house, and also around the mortuary in Old Montague Street, where the body was quickly removed. Telegraphing last night, the Central News says, although the police have made the most diligent inquiry after the murderer of the woman Chapman, who was killed in Spitalfields early on Saturday morning under the most brutal of circumstances, they had last night failed to secure the slightest clue to his whereabouts. As a matter of fact, they are in the dark about the personal appearance of the man for whom they are looking. It is true that they possess the description of the man who is known as Leather Apron and will arrest him if he can be
They
found,
let him
but their
go.
theory
It's
is
weird.
that Leather Apron is a more or less mystical personage and that he is not responsible for the terrible crimes with which his name has been associated.
I don't know. I
All
think
the
he
same,
is.
the details of his appearance have been widely circulated with a view to his early apprehension, and all the police in the vicinity are on the lookout for him. On Saturday night, a large force of police constables and detectives closely watched the neighborhood. Men were posted at all the entrances.
So all these things that they're posting right here and reading, these things are just like small portions. I've got like all the articles from the newspapers to the coroner to the constables to the police. Oh, it's just there's a lot of stuff in here. Like when they say this is the ultimate, what the hell is this called? The ultimate Jack the Ripper companion, they're not lying.
And exits of the numerous alleys and passages in the neighborhood, who every few minutes made a thorough examination of the places under their surveillance, and from time to time these were visited by the inspectors on duty with a view of ascertaining whether any suspicious characters had been observed. From 10 o'clock at night until late in the morning, a large crowd occupied Hanbury Street in the vicinity of the notorious house, number 29. When the public houses emptied, the occupants swarmed into the street and caused a good deal of trouble to the police by their behaviour. The people living in the adjoining houses obtained no rest until between 4 or 5 o'clock, when the crowd gradually melted away, only, however, to reassemble again in greater force as soon as daylight appeared. In the course of Saturday night and Sunday morning, the police arrested 2 men on suspicion of being concerned in the crime. One man, whose appearance left little doubt in the minds of his captors that he was the Hanbury Street murderer, was found by an officer in Bucks Row shortly after 1 o'clock on Sunday morning. A murder was, it will be remembered, committed in this neighbourhood but a short time since, and the police have since then been constantly pursuing their investigations in that quarter. The man upon whom suspicion rested presented a most forbidding appearance. He appeared to be hiding in the street, and when accosted by the officer, rushed off at the top of his speed. An alarm was raised, and after a sharp race, the man was arrested. He was a villainous-looking fellow with long hair and a shaggy beard, dressed only in a pair of ragged blue
Look
serge
at that nose. Whew.
trousers and an old dirty shirt. He resisted his captors, but was eventually secured and conveyed to Bethnal Green Police Station. It was said at the time that he was carrying a long knife concealed in the sleeve of his shirt, but on examination, no weapon was found upon him. He gave an account of himself,
I wonder if this is the guy that was sitting on the stoop and cut a piece of leather off his boot.
which was in the first instance considered unsatisfactory, but inquiries were immediately set on foot, and in the result, the man, who appears to be a common vagrant, was released from custody. The second arrest was effected in Gloucester Street, where a man aged about 40, having the look of a seafarer, was arrested. It was pretty obvious, however, from the replies which he gave and his general appearance, that he was not the man sought. After he had spent time in Commercial Street Police Station, he was also set at liberty.
I
The
want to
police
visit
give
there.
information very unwillingly. Indeed, they are unwilling to accept assistance or suggestions from any private source and work upon a plan of their own, which consists of frequent visits to the common lodging houses of the neighbourhood and a strict watch at night in all the streets in the vicinity. All day yesterday, 5 policemen guarded the scene of the crime in Hanbury Street. No one was admitted unless he resided in the house. In the street, half a dozen costermongers.
Wow, look how old that is, eh? I believe that's a drawing.
took up their stand and did a brisk business in fruit and refreshments. Thousands of respectably dressed persons visited the scene, and occasionally the road became so crowded that the constables had to clear it by making a series of raids upon the spectators. The windows of the adjoining houses were full of persons watching the crowd below. A number of people also visited the house in Dorset Street, where the woman lodged.
This is so odd to me. Why is everybody just kind of sitting around with their babies on the ground? Is it like really, really poor back then? Like, what is everybody doing? Like, a lot of people are sitting. Are they beggars? Mm.
The usually lively condition of Whitechapel and Spitalfields on Sunday was considerably
Oh, okay, I get it.
augmented yesterday by reason of the excitement aroused by the murder. In the course of the day, nearly a dozen persons were arrested and conveyed to the Commercial Street Police Station. In the afternoon, a vast crowd had collected about the streets, and as each apprehension was made, they rushed pell-mell towards the station, obviously under the idea that the murderer of the woman had been caught. In the neighbourhood of the mortuary, which is situated in Eagle Place at the Whitechapel end of Hanbury Street, all was quiet during the day. The green doors opened now and again to admit some inspectors of police and several medical gentlemen, but all others were rigidly excluded.
Mm.
The Press Association says, last night, Hanbury Street, Whitechapel, was in all but an impassable state owing to the crowds which had assembled in the neighbourhood of the scene of the last East End tragedy. Some thousands of people passed through the locality during the early part of the day, and the police authorities at Commercial Street Police Station had a number of constables drafted from the other parts of the metropolis, and these, as evening advanced, were busily occupied in keeping people moving. The public excitement as the day advanced appeared rather to grow than diminish, and strong evidence of the fact was apparent last night. Not only did large crowds of poorer classes loiter in the vicinity of the spot where the murder was committed, but a number of the more well-to-do were to be seen either gazing with awe-stricken faces at Mrs. Richardson's house, in the rear of which the mutilated body of the victim was found, or endeavouring to glean something additional as to the circumstances of the tragedy. Up to 9:30 last night, the police at Commercial Street were unable to say that their investigation had been attended with success. The police authorities at Scotland Yard and Whitechapel are fully conscious of the difficult nature of the task they have before them in identifying any particular individual with a series of appalling crimes. God knows, said an official to our reporter, but we may have another tonight, though we have men patrolling the whole region of Whitechapel and Spitalfields. That the police are putting forth every possible effort there can be no doubt. Last night there was a large force on duty. 1/3 of the men are in plain clothes, and even those entitled to leave of absence are retained. That the public are anxious to second their efforts is testified by the presence on record at Commercial Street of no less than 50 personal statements made with the object of assisting in the work of identification. One officer has been occupied many consecutive hours in writing up these statements, and up to 9 o'clock last night they were being supplemented by others. The police are not permitted to make public the written evidence, if evidence it can be called. It is doubtful if it will ultimately prove of much value, but one special representative, in pursuing his investigations last night, heard in the presence of the police a statement which perhaps ought not to be altogether dismissed as unworthy of notice. The informant was a young woman named Lyons, of the class commonly known as unfortunates. She stated that at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon she met a strange man in Flower and Dean Street, one of the worst streets.
Yeah, it just seems they use the streets to talk, to play. That's where it's like a meeting ground for everybody. Huh.
It's in the East End of London. He asked her to go to the Queen's Head public house at 6:30 and drink with him. Having obtained from the young woman a promise that she would do so, he disappeared, but was at the house at the appointed time. While they were conversing, Lyons noticed a large knife in the man's right-hand trousers pocket and called another woman's attention to the fact. A moment later, Lyons was startled by a remark which the stranger addressed to her. "You are about the same style of woman as the one that's murdered." "What do you know about her?" asked the woman, to which the man replied, "You are beginning to smell a rat. Foxes hunt geese, but they don't always find them."
Wow.
Having uttered these words, the man hurriedly left. Lyons followed until near Spitalfields Church, and turning round at this spot, and noticing that the woman was behind him, the stranger ran at a swift pace into Church Street, and was at once lost to view. One noteworthy fact in this story is that the description of the man's appearance is in all material points identical with the published description of the unknown and up to the present undiscovered leather apron. It is currently reported in Hanbury Street that on Saturday morning the following paragraph, written in chalk, was seen upon the wall of one of the back gardens there, and 4 persons distinctly stated they had actually seen the writing. The words are, I have now done 3 and intend to do 9 more and give myself up, and at the same time give my reasons for doing the murders. Whether there is any truth in the matter remains to be seen. The Press Association says, on the wall of the yard where the body was discovered, the words were found to be written, 5, 15 more, and then I give myself up.
Luckily, there wasn't 15. There was quite a few, though. Almost. Oh, definitely had a thing. Well, I believe the Ripper believed that they were worthless. They were nothing because they were prostitutes. They were married, but yet either the husband left them or they left the husband because they were alcoholics and they turned to prostitution. Oh, no worries. I'm gonna get off here. I just wanted to play that little clip and then play more on Martha Tabram. We gotta watch that one and still watch the one on Marianne Nichols. We're still on the Annie Chapman murder. This is a big one. So I will be back on Thursday with more Jack the Ripper. Tomorrow, I'll be reading Lethal Marriage again. I'm not going to read all the disgusting RAPE parts on it because I don't even want to read it. That other day when I was supposed to do it, I didn't want to do it. So I canceled. I was just like, oh, it's too much. So I'm going to try my best to skip through it. So that's why when you hear me read, so on Saturday when they went this and he called her, never mind, I'll read this. And then I go, oh, never mind, I'll read this. That's why, it's because it's too graphic. I'm sure you get the gist of it. 99, Zuna. Yeah, 99. All right, you guys have a great night. Thank you for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow. Have a good night. Bye.